Hey guys, Pastor Shelley here. Welcome to Zoom again tonight. It's April 1st, April Fool's Day, and this is not a joke video. It's an actual video of me. I'm sitting here in my car, and I have a lesson that I want to teach you tonight. And I just thought I would sit in my car because there's something about my car that I need to show you later that will help you to remember the story I'm going to tell you. First of all, we're going to start off with some songs. These are songs that you probably don't know yet, but I thought they're really cool. They have really nice dance actions to them, so you can get up and you can dance to them and you can learn them, and then when we're back at church again, maybe we'll do them together. All right?
I'm in the roughest water, I won't go under, I won't drown. When I'm in over my head, I know that you won't let me down. When I'm broken and down to nothing, I know that you are always up to something good. Something good. Even through the deepest valley, you go before me, you are here. For I know you'll never leave me, your love surrounds me, I won't fear. When I'm broken and down to nothing, I know that you are always up to something good. I know that you are always up to something good. You'll make a way, whatever it takes. There's nothing your love won't endure. I know that you are always up to something good. To something good. I know that you are always up to something good. You'll make a way, whatever it takes. There's nothing your love won't endure. I know that you are always up to something good. You'll make a way, whatever it takes. There's nothing your love won't endure. I know that you are always up to something good.
Feel the wonder, say his name. Watch the darkness slip away. Put your power on display. Say goodbye to fear and shame. We won't stop coming after you. We won't move until you move. Come and do what only you can do. Come and do what only you can do. We won't stop coming after you. We won't move until you move. Come and do what only you can do. Come and do what only you can do. Move.
tell you a story that is really, really cool. It's an epic story, and I really like it a lot. It involves a big dark hole. It involves really, really mean siblings. It involves, what else? A prison, birds pecking at someone's head. Like, it's a crazy story. But it's an amazing true story from the Bible that God's given us to teach us some really cool stuff. So it's the story of a man named Joseph. When we think of Joseph, we think of two different guys. One is in the Old Testament and one is in the New Testament. The one in the New Testament is Jesus' father, and his name is Joseph. So sometimes that's who people think it is. But this is a Joseph from the Old Testament. And Joseph was a man who was really, really awesome. And he had some very amazing things happen to him in his life. When he was a young guy, he had 11 brothers. And his dad did something kind of bad parenting thing to do. He thought that Joseph was his favorite, and so he treated Joseph better than everybody else. And then what happened was the brothers got really jealous. Like, one day Joseph's dad brought a really, really beautiful coat and just gave it to Joseph, didn't give anything else to his brothers. Like, and the brothers were like, you think he's better than all of us and you like him the most. Have you ever been jealous of a sibling? I have before. Sometime when I was a kid, I would say, you like my brother better than me. But that wasn't true. My parents didn't have favorites. But Joseph's dad actually did have a favorite, and Joseph was it. The brothers did not like it. Now, Joseph made a big mistake once because he had a really weird dream. Like, not the, I had too much pizza, so then I dreamt that I was in the Bahamas, jet skiing in my pajamas. Like, it wasn't that kind of a dream. That'd just be weird. Instead, it was a God dream, a dream that God gives people to tell them something interesting about their life or to tell them something that's going to happen, because he does that sometimes. And so Joseph had a dream like that, and he made the mistake of telling it to his brothers. So Joseph says to his brothers one day, so guys, you know what? I had the funniest dream. I dreamed that we were all out and we were tying up our wheat, like bundles of wheat. And funniest thing, your bundles of wheat all bowed down to mine. That's the funniest thing. What a funny dream. And the brothers went, are you saying that you're going to be like ruler over us and we're going to be bowing down to you, little brother? Are you kidding me right now? And Joseph was like, just telling you my dream there, buddy. And then Joseph made the mistake of telling them about another dream that he had. He said, you know, I had the funniest dream. I dreamed that the sun and the moon and 11 stars bowed down to me. And the brothers were like, are you kidding me right now? You think that we're going to bow down to you? And so they were really mad and jealous of him. And so Joseph went and he told the dream to his dad, Jacob. And Jacob was like, are you saying that your mother and I and your brothers are all going to bow down to you? But Joseph thought about it for a while and really, really thought about that in his heart. Later on, Jacob asked Joseph to bring some food to his brothers when they were out in the field with their sheep. And when he did, the brothers were far off from him. They were seeing him coming. They were like, there he is, that little dreamer. We're going to get him. And it's a bit of a long story, but the short version is they took him, they grabbed his coat, and they threw him in a big empty hole. It was a big well that had dried up, and they threw him in it. And Joseph fell way down this hole. And it probably really injured him and hurt him a lot. But I think the thing that injured him probably the most is how his brothers were treating him, because there's nothing worse than that. And so he was down this hole going, oh my goodness, what am I going to do now? And then after a while, the brothers saw some Ishmaelites coming along, and these guys were guys that were bringing things to trade and get money. And so they were trading, and they were also people that would take people and sell them. Now, that's not something you can do these days, but people would do that, and they would sell people as slaves. So they took Joseph and they sold him as, they sold him to these guys as a slave. And so Joseph was gone on a wagon off to a distant land. And so the brothers, they decided they were going to tell a lie to their dad, and they grabbed his coat and they dipped it in animal blood, and they brought it to him. They said, look what happened to our brothers, an animal ate him. I mean, you can't get worse brothers than that. And so Joseph was on a wagon on his way to Egypt, probably feeling like, what just happened? Like, what is going on right now? My brothers hate me that much that they sold me as a slave? And his dad was so upset and crying, and he thought his son was gone forever. Well, so Joseph ended up in Egypt, and while he was there, he was sold as a slave to a man named Potiphar. Potiphar was an official in Pharaoh's court. Pharaoh was the king of Egypt. And so he got sold as a servant to Potiphar, but Joseph was a really good man, and so he lived his life really well, and Potiphar really liked him, and he kept him as one of his top people. And Joseph took care of a lot of things for Potiphar. But Potiphar's wife one day made up a lie about Joseph, and said that he did something that was not true at all. But Joseph got sent into prison. Now, can you imagine? I mean, it's bad enough that you get hurt by your brothers like that, but to be thrown into prison for something that you absolutely didn't do, like that'd be the worst thing, right? But a really cool thing about Joseph is that Joseph was always faithful to God, and he always worked really hard when he was going through his hard things. So while he was in prison, he got really well respected because he would listen to the guards, he would do the right things, and he was really helpful to other people. So that was an awesome thing. And but Joseph was still in prison, and he wanted to get out. So one day there were two men that had really made Pharaoh angry. They were guys who had worked for Pharaoh, but Pharaoh got angry with them, and he kicked them out and put them in prison. And one of them was a cupbearer. That's the guy who just tastes all the drinks for the king and makes sure that the food doesn't have any poison in it, and tastes it before he gives it to the king. The other guy was a baker, and the baker was the guy who would, bake for the king. So these guys were in prison for something. We don't really know what they did, but each of them had a dream, and they told their dreams to Joseph. Now, the cupbearer, he said, I had the weirdest dream. I dreamed that I was looking and I saw a bunch of grapes grow up, a vine grow up, and a bunch of grapes grew out of them, like 3 bunches of grapes. And they sprouted and they grew really big and fat. And I took them and I squeezed them, and all the juice came out, and the juice went into Pharaoh's cup. So that's a weird dream. And so Joseph said, wow, that is a different dream. But here's what God says, because God gave Joseph the interpretation of his dream. And he said, well, your dream means that in 3 days, Pharaoh is going to take you back and give you back your job. So then the baker came to him and he said, I've had a dream too. And the baker said, I dreamed that I was carrying 3 baskets of bread on my head. And while I was carrying them, birds came and they were pecking at me, and they're pecking all the bread out of my head, and all the food that I had there all came off. It's the weirdest thing. And so Joseph said, here's what your dream means. It's not as good as the cupbearer, let me tell you right now. He said, in 3 days, Pharaoh is going to take your life. You're not going to get your job back. You're going to lose your life in 3 days. And that is actually what happened to these guys in reality. But the cupbearer went on to work for Pharaoh, but he never remembered Joseph. And so this guy totally forgot about Joseph. So Joseph had been in prison all this time and thinking, this is my hope. This is my last hope of getting out. And it didn't work. This guy just totally forgot him. And so Joseph spent more time in prison. Eventually, Pharaoh had a really weird dream. If you want to find out what Pharaoh's dream was, I can't explain the whole thing here because it would be a very long video if I kept going with all the details of this story. It's a long story. But you can find it in Genesis chapter 41. Pharaoh explains his dream, and you can read the whole story of Joseph in Genesis. Now, Pharaoh had a dream, and because Joseph could interpret his dream, see, the cupbearer did eventually remember Joseph, and they went and got Joseph out of prison. He interpreted Pharaoh's dream, and because of that, he became a big official in Pharaoh's kingdom. And eventually, there was a famine, and because Joseph had wisdom from God about this famine, they had lots of food in Egypt, and Joseph's brothers eventually came and bowed down to him while they looked for food and for help from him. And it's a long story. It's a very beautiful story, and you can start reading it in Genesis chapter 41. You can read from there. But it just tells us that God is always faithful. God had a plan for Joseph, even though Joseph probably couldn't see it when he was sitting in prison or at the bottom of a big dark hole, or when he was being betrayed by other people. He probably didn't see that, but God was faithful. He was faithful all the way through. And there's 3 things I want to tell you about Joseph really quickly that make him sort of a hero to me. 1, Joseph always honored God. Always honored God. And even when things were, he was tempted to do otherwise, he honored God and he lived for God. And even though people were hurting him, he did the best that he could. The second thing about Joseph is that Joseph kept working hard. When he was a slave in Potiphar's house, he had a good reputation because he worked really hard. When he was in prison, he had a good reputation because he worked really hard. And God honored that, his hard work, and even though he was doing something he didn't want to do, he worked hard anyway, and God really honored that. And right now, we're going through school and at home, and sometimes that's really hard to do school when at the best of times when you have to do it at home and your teacher's not there. It can be a little bit difficult, and just getting yourself motivated to go and do something is sometimes hard. But you know, we have to be like Joseph and work hard at everything that we do. I think it's Colossians 3:23 says, in everything that you do, work at it with all of your heart, with all of your might, as if you were working for the Lord. And so make sure that you do that with your schoolwork and everything. Even though you're not at school, work your hardest and do your best. Be like Joseph and do the best that you absolutely can. Joseph trusted God. He trusted that no matter what was happening, God was going to take care of him. So why am I sitting in my car telling you this story today? Well, here's the reason. When I look back on my life, I can see that God is faithful. And sometimes there's certain things that have happened in my life, and I've looked around me and I went, I don't understand. I don't really know what's going on. God, what are you doing? And I've asked God why. And sometimes we can't see that God is faithful until we look back on our life and we see how he's been faithful all the way through. And that's the way it was with Joseph. Joseph, he went through some really horrible things, didn't he? I mean, getting thrown in prison, getting rejected by your brothers, and having so much trouble, getting thrown down a big dark hole. My goodness. But, you know, those things happened to him, but then at the end of his life, he was able to look back and say, wow, God was so faithful to me. Because God always has a plan all the way through. God doesn't do things randomly. He's always got a plan, right? So I want to show you the front of my car. When you're sitting in a car, okay? When you're sitting in a car, you can look ahead. When you're driving, I'm not driving right now because it wouldn't be good to drive and have a video going too. But when you drive, you have 3 ways that you can look. You can look ahead of you. You can look in front like that. You can look to the side like that. Or you can look in your rear view mirror, which looks behind. There it is. Now, I find in my life that sometimes when I look around me, I look in front of me, I look to the sides, I go, wow, I don't understand. I don't understand what's happening. But always I can see God's faithful when I look in the rear view mirror of my life. When I look back on my life, I look behind me, I can say, oh yeah, I know God's faithful because he did this. He did all those things. He's always been faithful in my life. So just remember that when you're looking around you, next time you're sitting in the car and you're looking around, you just go, yeah, you know what? I can't always see why something is happening or what's going on. But when I look back on my life, I know that God will be faithful. He will always be faithful. And someday we'll be back at school. We'll be back at church. Things will be back the way they were. And we'll look back on this whole time as just something that we all went through. And then God was faithful again to us. Just like he was faithful to Joseph, he will be faithful to us too. So I just wanted to leave you with that. I hope you have a great Wednesday, a great April Fool's Day today. And I hope you played lots of tricks on people. And if not, there's still time before you go to bed. Talk to you later. Love you all. Bye-bye.